Today is October 29th. Welcome to Native Calgarian. Oki, Naganago, Mekoches Chistokomaki. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use she and her pronouns. Native Calgarian is being recorded on the lands of the Niitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south of the imposed US-Canadian border are the Blackfeet, north of the border are the Siksika, Gunai, and Bagani of the Confederacy. These lands are Treaty 7, signed September 22, 1877, with signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Stoney Nakoda, the Wesley Chiniki Bearspaw Nations, and the Dene from Tsuut'ina. I acknowledge all First Nations, Métis status, non-status, Inuit across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. All non-Indigenous are treaty partners with the government signing on your behalf. I honor the Blackfoot as the elders and members have been so kind to me on the Red Road journey I've been on. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name. I was born in Calgary, or in Blackfoot, Mokinstis, as Michelle Elliott, another English name which has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. My mother is Northern Slave Dene, or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. My father is so Canadian. I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution while having an Indian Act imposed status card. I acknowledge my Dene lineage and that I was born in Calgary, but my family is not part of the Treaty 7 signatories. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Hare people, also called the Great Bear Lake people in Treaty 11. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene nation is a visitor to this area of Clincho Tine Intahe, meaning many horse town, named after the Calgary Stampede. Land acknowledgements are critical in creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as a guest and acknowledging my role as a treaty partner, as is yours. My humblest apologies to Blackfoot elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. Any mistakes or misinterpretations are on me. I acknowledge or I encourage questions so that misunderstandings that can be cleared up as soon as possible. I don't speak on behalf of all Indigenous, but I share what I know as I walk down my red road. If you're experiencing emotional distress after hearing anything we talk about today or want to talk, call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 1-855-242-3310. It is toll free and open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Non-Indigenous, there are distress lines in your area as well. So with that, I want to get started with a really special episode that we have this time. And I've been lucky enough to have CommunityWise reach out to me. We have a 28-page report about building accountability to Indigenous communities. And this was funded by the Human Rights, Education, and Multicultural Fund. So I want to start by introducing, or actually having everybody introduce themselves. And we started this recording actually with Jackie Bromley, our elder, doing an opening prayer for us, which I'm grateful for, Jackie. So I'm going to have you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and you know, a little about you.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Okay, good. Well, just like Michelle said, my name is Jackie Bromley, but really my legal name is Artemisia. And that name came from the nuns, the gray nuns. When I was born at the hospital, my mom was taken to Campsall Hospital in Edmonton because she had tuberculosis. My grandparents who raised me were very traditional and they didn't speak English. So in order for them to take me out of the hospital and to be registered with vital statistics in those days, the nuns had to give me a name. So that name I never use, but that's my legal name. And I don't know why the nuns gave me that name. And like I said, I don't use it. I'm married with 4 girls. All my girls are growing up. They're all living on their own. I've got 6 grandchildren. I've got 1 great-grandchild, and I was raised, like I mentioned, I was raised by my grandparents. Then I was taken away from my grandparents. I learned our traditional ways, and then when I was taken away to go to residential school, the only language I spoke was Blackfoot. Never spoke English because my grandparents didn't know 1 word of English. So all that time, I was very abused by the nuns and the priests because I couldn't speak English. And from there, just a little talk about it, it really brought down my self-esteem. I didn't have confidence, and I had a lot of fear in me, and it took a long time before I started looking at our cultural ways. And the one thing I'm going to always be proud of, and I'm always proud to say, when I moved to Calgary, I couldn't find a job anywhere. Everywhere I looked, there was nothing for this Indigenous person. Until I approached a Wookdan Healing Lodge, they hired me. The thing about a Wookdan Healing Lodge is they use all the 7 sacred teachings for their teachings to teach clients. They do all the sharing circles. And that's when I started really thinking about, how to forgive, how to get away from being fearful, my self-esteem. I felt confident in myself. That's where my healing journey started, is when I started at Awutan. And I'm going to say I'm always so thankful. And the day I was given by Awutan, when Josie told me, I would like for you to be an elder, I hesitated. So I asked the late Andy Blackwater. I said, Andy, I've been approached. He's gone into the spirit world. I've been approached to be an elder. And I told him, I don't really feel good about it. I don't feel I earn it. He said, I'm going to tell you. Called me by my Indian name, Apoyiski, light-haired woman. He said, you were raised in a very traditional way. You seen your grandparents doing all the cultural, the bundle opening, going to the Sundance, all that. And that's where I'm going to give you that gift. Accept it. You're going to teach the generation today about your life experience. So once I received that honor, I take it with me to tell my stories through the blanket exercise of how it is to be in a residential school. All the discrimination, all the racism that I went through. And that's where my healing journey started. And all the reconciliation. We still haven't covered all the reconciliation, but all I can say is we're starting to come together. We are. Look at it right now. We're coming together. People are seeing that this is something that we do. We start off with everything that we do with a prayer. Because for us Indigenous people, the Creator gave us a gift. You don't have to pray in a certain way as long as you talk to your Creator, as long as you teach your kids to pray. And thank you for listening. Ken.
Thank you so much for that, Jackie. I appreciate that. Geez, maybe Nicole, would you like to introduce yourself?
Okay, my name is Nicole Ishkakugan, and I am from the Skumuk First Nation in Ontario and the Piikani Nation of the Blackfoot Confederacy. My Anishinaabe background is the Bear Clan, and with the Nitsitapi, it is the Nadeitska, the Lone Fighter Society. So before I get to sharing anything, I'd really like to thank Elder Jackie for the prayer and for being a survivor of Indian residential school. Everything that we do today is because of you and others surviving that extreme colonialism. So thank you. And your amazing gifts. And so, and you're also part of the first generation Indigenous women's protectors. So those that first started the battle for us Indigenous people that led to CommunityWise having the opportunity and others to implement an Indigenous anti-racism project. So I'd like to thank CommunityWise for making sure, but we need to remember it stems back to our survivors about why this is all possible. And also Michelle, our host, thank you for gathering us today and for bringing this podcast. And it's Red Thunder Woman. Okay, I'm going to remember that. And so, yeah, my Indian name is Morning Star. And so soon to be, I won't be Nicole Ishkakugan anymore. I'm legally changing my name to just Morning Star. I've been debating whether or not I'll say that in Ojibwe or Blackfoot. I've returned home. This is the Indian Head behind me. It's an actual natural rock formation of a mountain driving into my community. And so my community is surrounded by Appalachian mountains and water, lakes, and islands everywhere. Hang on, my grandson's walking. And so I'm happy to be home. And so I've lived and worked in Alberta for the last 30 years and wore a lot of hats. My most proudest though is finding a home at the Awatan Healing Lodge where I still work for. And because it is working with survivors and survivors of violence and missing murdered Indigenous women and girls. And that's become my passion. And so I couldn't leave there when I did come home to Ontario, where I'm the community wellness director. And of course, the focus right now is the fight against COVID and keeping our communities well. But my main reason for returning home was I always promised my family, who were very, very scared of schools and education, just for the reasons that Elder Jackie gave. And so my sharing is that I really want to acknowledge those two that have opened up their hearts to education, formal mainstream education, and those that are attending it right now, because they walk a double battle. Sometimes always triple jeopardy they're in, because they're fighting to still belong and maintain their traditions while they're learning mainstream language and theories that are very foreign to us. So it's a whole other different kind of battle. And so those that make it out, I'm really, really proud of them, and I'm proud of the ones that are in there. And I know some of you on the call are. So I'm near mine. I have a near end then. I'm a PhD candidate now, but after all that, what became important to me was not staying in mainstream or no longer working for bureaucracy. I did that most of my life, and I made a promise to my family, who are now gone on to the spirit world, my aunties and uncles and my mother, so that I would go out and learn, but I would always come back and be a protector of our Niitsitapi way of life, and our Anishinaabeg way of life. So that's why I returned home. My goals are quite different now. I, 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 I realize that I've been to school, but I really have no education. I feel very well, I was well mentored and taken care of by my Niitsitapi family. So I think, talk, and act Blackfoot. I'm really proud to say that. But to my teachings are is, what would my grandmother do every time something comes up that's challenging for me? And if I don't have my Anishinaabe teachings or my language, I don't feel like I can be a good human being, especially if I journey on to the spirit world. I want to have all those teachings with me. And so I return home to give back everything I've learned back to my community. And I've also made a conscious effort to be a fluent speaker within 5 years. So I just have different goals being a grandmother now, and I have 5 of them. So you heard one come in. They're constantly jumping into meetings, so don't worry if one of them pops up here with me. But I just wanted to share that and share how important and how we are all united by Indian residential school, even those who are in formal education now, and how that very much impacts the journeys that we take.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I would love to have that conversation with you about changing your name, because I've been having that conversation in the house and such. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Steve, would you like to do an introduction?
Gladly. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Stitch. My name's Steve Cooney Jobin. I'm a Yahe Nakota from Stoney Nation here in Treaty 7 territory. My people are known as the people of the mountains. I also have Métis in me as well on my father's side. I'm born and raised in the northeast of Calgary. I identify as two-spirited. I recently got married this past August to my partner Juan, and I've worked at Mount Royal University for the last 6 years as the Indigenous Housing and Events Coordinator. I also returned to school last year. I'm currently pursuing a Master's of Education in Interdisciplinary Studies. My undergraduate degree is in sociology, and my passion for sociology and really wanting to pursue education began from the inequalities that I experienced as an Indigenous person growing up in Calgary. You know, back in the 80s and the 90s, my family, we were one of the only Indigenous families in our entire neighborhood. I remember what it was like going to school, and thankfully I grew up in a very multicultural part of the city in the heart of the Northeast. So I had a lot of friends from around the world, and because of that, I think that's what really afforded me opportunities to really instill pride in my culture and also my identity as well. However, my route to reconnecting with culture and my spirituality has been a challenging one, and it is continuously ongoing. My grandparents went to residential school. My mother went to day school as well. I come from a community where language retention and culture is so strong. You know, I grew up in a bilingual household, but I also grew up with a lot of shame in my family because we were living with the intergenerational effects of residential school. When we look at the traumas and the struggles that plague Indigenous peoples, such as addiction, incarceration, homelessness, and poverty, and many other factors, those are things that my family and me that we're coming from. I'm very proud that I am breaking cycles and encouraging more family members to pursue post-secondary and to be the first person in my family to graduate from high school, and then going on and being one of the first to be able to finish university. And I'm the first in my family on both sides to pursue graduate studies. My passion really came from, you know, seeing life different and seeing life from a different perception, because when I was going to school in K-12, the Calgary Board of Education, we didn't talk about Indigenous peoples. I remember it being the shortest chapter in our textbooks and only at a grade 4 level. We talked about snowshoes and canoes, and that there was First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples, And we talked about the Hudson's Bay Company. It seemed like a happy history. It was told that we were discovered, that we shared things. We never once talked about the inequalities. We never talked about missing murdered Indigenous women and girls. We never talked about residential school, the 60 scoop, or anything at all whatsoever. When I was getting into high school and I was getting ready to graduate, I didn't really understand a lot of the struggles that my family was going through. You know, I grew up in a household that I had parents who did not drink or drug within our household. I had family who was very connected within the community, but it seemed like for every step forward we took, we seemed to take 3 steps back. When I was not understanding a history that was hidden from me, but living with the realities, I really didn't understand it. And I began to question, you know, how come my life wasn't like this, like some of my friends? How come my life isn't like this? When things like seem to come so easy for other people, you know, like housing, food and whatnot, they're things that me and my family struggled for every single day of our lives, and we're still on that. I began to be a little bit biased. I began to judge and compare and felt like I was a little bit cheated. There was times I was asking my family, like, why aren't you a better mother? Why aren't you a better father? Why aren't you a better grandparent? Here's what my friends do for them. As I began to uncover a history that was hidden from me, I began to realize that I was judging and comparing my family to people who never walked a mile in our moccasins. For where my family is today and where we are in our healing journey, we are very strong people, and we have a lot of warriors within my family who are retaining our languages, our cultures. We're getting educated in both the Western and the traditional worlds. And that's where I have my passion in sociology and being able to discuss race and inequalities, because, you know, being an Indigenous two-spirited, a boy that grew up in the Northeast in social housing, those are all the parts of my realities and my cycles that I am breaking every single day. I feel that I am constantly walking in both worlds, and I love to share my knowledge and my history with people and to give them a better understanding, because I want to do my part in reconciliation, but I also want to do my part in moving forward so that in the future generations to come, you know, our children, our youth, they are going to be happy and proud to be Indigenous. I'm hoping that we get to gain more language, because unfortunately, you know, my family thought they were doing us a good opportunity, giving us English names, not teaching us their language. They wanted us to really, really succeed in the city that we didn't have much connection to in our spirituality. And, you know, as we're going through, we're constantly trying to learn more, engaging in more ceremonies. My traditional name is Natoya Pixki, which translates to Holy Bird. And I'm always wanting to learn more, because I have learned to be proud of who I am, because I've hit that for a long time. And that's why when I was approached to work on, be a part of this Indigenous Advisory Group for CommunityWise, I wanted to do my part because I want to share my story and my connections, because it's through social programming and organizations like this that my family survived in Calgary, but that we've also thrived as well. And I was taught to give back. My grandmother was an elder in the community for many years. My mother also works at Awutan Healing Lodge as well. And I have several family in the community who have always raised me that I need to do my part and that I need to give back. And I'm very fortunate to work with an Indigenous organization and to support Indigenous students on their path to post-secondary. Ishnish, thank you.
It's so wonderful hearing that. Thank you for that share. I so appreciate it. Everyone that's actually part of this, that's with us right now, every one of you is a role model to my daughter and to myself. So I just appreciate every single one of you so much. With that, Jenna, would you like to unmute yourself and introduce yourself?
Sure. So Tansi, Quiraba, and Bozu. So I'm Jenna Martins Forrester. I'm a student at the University of Calgary studying anthropology and global development with a minor in Indigenous Studies. I finished my Indigenous Studies minor. Now it's just the degrees to get out of the way. And my family is from the Cypress Hills in Saskatchewan, and also from Mexico, down in Chihuahua. And so my background is all on my mother's side, because I don't know anything about my father's side. I never met my dad. So all my culture comes from my mom, and it is Cree, Soto, and Raramuri, which is like, I think the Tarahumara is the more well-known word for it, but we prefer Raramuri. And yeah, I grew up with a single mom who raised me as traditionally as she was able. But she had a lot to contend with when she was trying to raise me, because my grandfather divorced my grandmother when my mom was still fairly young, and he remarried a white woman who did not want my mother to know her culture, and did not want my mom to talk about her culture, and didn't want her to acknowledge her indigeneity at all. I love my grandmother, I have to. But she was very racist. I'd say she still is, but she's now has Alzheimer's, so I feel like she's mellowed with age. Yeah, so it's a complicated situation. Thankfully, my mom didn't let her connection to her culture get stomped out. She stayed connected through my grandfather and through my great-grandfather and my biological grandmother, and I was able to stay connected while my great-grandfather and my grandfather were alive, but they've both passed into the spirit world. And my great-grandfather was actually a horse trader. So he was actually the last fluent speaker in our family, and he spoke Cree, he spoke Nakota, he spoke Blackfoot. I don't speak any of those languages. He spoke Ojibwe, and I'm slowly in the process of trying to relearn those languages so that I could pass them on if I ever have children. And my mom is, she's learning Nakota. She's doing it faster than I am with Cree and Blackfoot. She's just better at languages than I am. And I'm also trying to learn Spanish so that I can actually talk to my Spanish speaking family, because my Spanish is terrible. It's really bad. Yeah, that's my background. We're kind of a complicated family. Not knowing my dad means that I didn't have a lot of influence from that side of the family. But she also tried to keep me connected to him by giving me the name Jenna, which is a tribute to his Irish background, because he was a ginger. He was an Irish ginger. And that's really all I know about him. So she's like, I gave you a Gaelic name for your dad, but that's the best I could do, sorry. Yeah, and I hope that through studying anthropology and development, that I can help preserve Indigenous culture, preserve our teachings and our ways of life. I was supposed to get my spirit name this year, but then COVID happened. So that was a bit of a sticking point. And hopefully that'll happen next year once we have a vaccine, fingers crossed. My mom's spirit name is Good Eagle Woman, which I always found so beautiful. And I'm hoping that I am able to reach out to an elder in the next year or so, once everything's safer and I can finally get my spirit name. So yeah, it was cool to be a part of this.
Well, it's an honor to hear you and hear you introduce yourself that way. My Indigenous sister, I'm so grateful. Megan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I know we've all met and had meetings before, but every time I hear introductions, I'm always blown away by the strength and beauty that everybody brings to this group, and I feel very honored and humbled to be a part of this group with you all. My name is Megan Aslan. My pronouns are she, her. I identify myself as Anishinaabe Métis, but because of the way that the Indian Act works and restrictions on legally holding more than one identity. I am a registered member of Whitefish Bay First Nation in Ontario. I think not very far from where Nicole is. The background looks so familiar. It feels very, very much like where I grew up spending summers in my childhood. I was born and raised in Calgary, and my grandmother attended residential school when she was a child. So I don't have a traditional name. That was sort of the beginning of a very big rupture in my family, separation from our culture, and something that my generation is really sort of the forerunners in bringing that back into our family, and some of us are kind of dragging our parents along in that reclaiming of identities as well. And so that's something that I feel, even after all these years, kind of still a new beginner identity. Like, it's still something that I'm learning so much about. But every step of learning feels like it just feels so much like the right step, a step in the right direction. I am the member support coordinator at CommunityWise. So I was actually sitting on the Indigenous Advisory Group at CommunityWise before I started working here. And luckily I was able to continue that work when I made the transition from being a volunteer board member to being a staff person here. And so I am really excited to hear what this experience has been like for everyone, and also to be able to see how this work will continue and how we can honor all of the voices that have been shared with us, and also to have the fun of implementing it down the road, because some of the recommendations that have come out of this, not all of the recommendations that have come out of this have been really wonderful, but I think some of them are going to be particularly fun to do. And so I am grateful for that as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. JC, would you like to chime in? Love to hear an introduction so that people know who you are. And
Dante Sagasan JC Aluk. Hello, my name is JC Aluk. I am a Big Stone Cree Nation member, which is located in a place called Wabasca, which is geographically out, it's kind of smack in the center of northern Alberta. I am Nihiao Esqueo, which translates to Cree woman. I'm a mother of 2 daughters, and I am very blessed to be here today. I want to thank Jackie for opening us up today. Thank you for that reminder and that grounding. I really needed it. I've had a very busy last couple days, so thank you so much. I have had the pleasure of working, living, and learning in Mohkinstsis over the last 11 years now. I moved here to pursue an undergrad degree. It took me 6 years to complete, but I did it, and I was able to have most of my immediate family come up and watch me graduate, which was a very significant milestone in our lives. What else? I was going to share something. Oh, I guess I wanted to share, I use pronouns she and her, and yeah, living here has been an honor. I work in community primarily, and I have the pleasure of meeting and learning and spending time with elders, knowledge keepers, and friends that I've come to know. So I'm always humbled to be in this area for so long. My daughters have made strong connections here, and yeah, I think we will stay here for longer. It's really hard to say with all of these changes occurring in our world. I want to share one last thing before I finish here. I just wanted to share that what question that Michelle wanted us to maybe share was any relatives that had experienced going to residential school. And my father had as a boy, and as well my kukum or grandmother on my mother's side went as well. And I think both had experienced very different treatment. I left home very early. I was 13 or 14, and I moved to Edmonton for high school. And so I didn't have a lot of influence over my aunties and my parents and my brothers and my cousins. I felt very lucky to be able to go to pursue a better life, as my father had said. There were a lot of things going along my life where it seemed it was best for me to leave my community. So there was a severed disconnect there early on, and I'm finding that the more that I had learned of our collective history as all Indigenous people, and finding out that my dad actually attended residential school when I was in post-secondary, a lot of things started falling into place. And I am myself on that journey of, coming into respecting and loving myself and understanding who I am and understanding who my father is, and our way of life, which it is a Cree worldview, and very very lucky to be in a place where I can say I'm proud to be here as a mom and learn with my daughters. I'm super grateful to be a part of this. I was approached by Thalassy, and just very honored to be continuing to grow and learn. And I guess that's all I'll share. Thank you so much.
That's a beautiful introduction. Thank you, JC, for sharing that. It's so great to hear everybody. And then, of course, if we were in a circle, then the last person that would be here right on my right, down it has this beautiful screen in the background. I don't know if it's a picture or if it's a curtain. It looks so pretty. So I'll let you introduce yourself and go from there.
Hi, my name is Maris, which actually means of the sea. It was my given French and English name. I was raised bilingual growing up. I was born in Rimouski, Quebec, which is Mi'kmaq territory, and I was raised in Halifax, or Chibuktuk, which is also Mi'kmaq territory. So always grew up by the sea with the smell of the salt in the air. And I'm 12th generation settler French Canadian. I've been out in Mohkinstsis since 2014, so 6 years now. Time just flies by. My traditional name is Ikinamachka, which means gentle traveler. It was gifted to me by my traditional adopted parents, who are Randy Bottle and Anita Eaglebear of the Gaina First Nation of the Blackfoot Confederacy. So a lot of my teachings have come from them and a myriad of other incredible elders that I've had the chance to get to know over these past 6 years here. And Steve touched a bit on education. And my education in Nova Scotia, the more I think back on it, it was a very similar experience to CBE and the public school system here, and probably even to a more intense degree. It was, our history books were filled with falsehoods, to use the gentlest word possible for it. And it wasn't until I moved to Mohkinstsis that my true education began. And that began by forming relationships with Indigenous community members here, working in Indigenous spaces, and learning from Indigenous elders. So I'm really just in the first little wobbly baby steps of my learning journey here. And I was so grateful to be a part of this project with CommunityWise. I'm the team lead at Diamond Willow Youth Lodge, and we were located in the CommunityWise building, and I was able to learn and work with CommunityWise members to bring about this anti-racism project and see where we can do better, because on this journey we're always looking, okay, we've done this is great, what can we do better? And it's constantly you know, we make treaty every day. It's not something that is signed and is done. It continues on in our current history, and it'll continue on with our children and our grandchildren, and we'll constantly be re-examining our relationships every day. I hope so anyways. Thank you, Michelle Robinson, for inviting us here today. This is really wonderful. Thank you. Hi, all my relations.
What an honor to hear everybody. Thank you for these introductions. I so appreciate it. You know, the reason why we're here today is to talk about this report, Building Accountability to Indigenous Communities Project Evaluation. It was mainly put together by Nicole as well, and it was funded by the Human Rights, Education, and Multiculturalism Fund and CommunityWise. What a beauty, like just looking at the contents, we have, you know, the overview, the assessment, you know, key findings about the smudging policy, the land acknowledgement, the employment equity policy. I found that very interesting to read through. So again, this is a 28-page report. It's beautifully put together. And, you know, there's lots that's written in here, but our purpose for today's podcast is really to hear about what this experience was like for you, and maybe some incredible takeaways that you didn't expect. And Jackie, we'll start with you and just hear what your thoughts were with being part of this project and some of those key takeaways.
Okay, well, first of all, you know, when Nicole first asked me, you know, to join CommunityWise, and we both went over there. And when we sat with the staff and whoever was there, you know, it made me think. And I did talk about reconciliation, and I did talk briefly about, to me as an elder, and I've always said it, you know, reconciliation, we're still working on the same issues a lot of times. And it's going to take a lot, maybe 10 years, maybe the next generation. That's when it's finally we're going to finally see reconciliation. And when we did the blanket exercise, I really seen the interest that CommunityWise had knowing about our culture. And I don't know, like, I'm very traditional. I don't know. We have our, I usually look at our traditional Indigenous work ethics. I think they call them code of ethics. And I had a look at it, and I thought, you know, I'm glad we did the blanket exercise, because a lot of non-Indigenous people, I've heard some of them come up to me and say, you know, Jackie, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing about the blanket exercise. And the very first time I did the blanket exercise, I was very angry, very angry. I had so much anger in me. Even the very first time I did the blanket exercise, like, I just wanted to walk away and not deal with it. How the Europeans, how they forced us to go to residential school. Our parents, our grandparents had no choice. If they seen a letter that's in writing in red. Remember my mom telling me a story about that. He said, that's sort of like a warning. If the parents do not allow their kids to go to school, once you get that letter in red, that means something. And when I seen the person that played the role as a European had a hat, those round hats, had a suit on and a cane, walked around, you know, where everybody was standing, doing the play, and the more, and he was a good actor. The more he walked around, like, he was so proud that he can order the Indigenous people. Oh, no kidding. I was just getting so frustrated. And here, all that time, I was mad at my parents. I was mad at my poor grandparents who didn't speak English. And when I finished the first one, I had to really think about it. I had to think and say to myself, okay, Jackie, are you ready to do another blanket exercise? But anyways, I went ahead, and I always tell myself, that's my healing journey. That's where my healing. And when I did that blanket exercise, I kind of looked around, observing. And I always do that, observing. You can really tell when people speak from the heart, how they felt, how the Indigenous people were treated. And I was asked, I didn't know that this happened. I wasn't aware of it. Now I understand how it was like to be forced to go to school. And being around, joining those meetings, and, you know, and I'm going to say this, I'm always so proud. I'm always proud of the generation today. I'm going to speak about you, Michelle, because you're Indigenous. Steve, I'm going to talk about you. JC, Nicole. I am so proud of you. The generation going back to school. And I'm going to say, I didn't, after I left the 60 school, I was forced from residential. Indian Affairs stepped in again. You're not going to go home. You're going to go live with white families. And I had to go live with white people. And I was going through the same thing. Do not speak your language. You speak English. All that, even though it may not be physical, but mentally, it really scars a person in so many ways, because I've seen that in residential school. There was a lot of physical abuse. There was a lot of sexual abuse. All of that. And now that I'm starting to see, even with CommunityWise and a lot of other agencies, there's a lot of the code of ethics that are being followed. They're showing a lot of respect. CommunityWise is. They treat us with respect. And I feel I don't fear that. I don't have that fear. And it's making me be a stronger person. When I start feeling that connection, it makes me feel very proud that I am an Indigenous woman. I'm able to stand tall when I'm asked to do a presentation. I've told myself, it's people, it's agencies that have started working with us, that are starting to make me be a strong person. And now I can say, and I can stand up in a crowd of 200 people and tell myself I'm Indigenous, and I'm proud that I'm Indigenous. So I'm going to speak from my heart, and I'm going to talk to these people. And being with CommunityWise, it's nice that they want to be working together with the Indigenous people. And I want to thank the board and the staff for allowing Nicole to do the work. And like I said, I am so proud of the generation now. I'm getting an education because I'm one that doesn't have an education. And it is sad when I think about it. I just think I don't know how many times I'm going to say it, but I'm so proud of the youth and your generation. You're showing us we can do it. We can do it. We're smart. And I want to say thank you to the Creator right now for my words of wisdom that I felt I needed to say. Thank you.
It was wonderful to hear that. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for telling us next generation how proud you are of us. If it wasn't for your sacrifice and so many others that survived Indian residential school, we couldn't be here to do those things. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for that share. And thank you for telling us about how much you appreciated CommunityWise doing this initiative and being respectful to you and to everybody. And with that, I'll pass it on to Nicole, give her space to talk about some of the highlights of this project for her as she works on her PhD.
Thanks. So thank you again, Jackie. I just want to say, all of us sitting here and all of those listening, we're very privileged because the generations under us won't ever have the opportunity to say that they personally knew a survivor of Indian residential school. And I think that is really important. And that's something that I will say I'm very privileged and honored to have had knowledge and access to someone like you, Jackie, and to my parents who went to residential school and others, because if we don't keep those teachings and realities alive, our children are going to get comfortable to a way of thinking that doesn't belong to us, and get comfortable with not knowing that every day we're in a battle. Indigenous people have never known one day of peace. We're always at war. You know, Indigenous nations across Canada right now are under attack. The Mi'kmaq are fighting for their treaty rights to provide for their families. The Anishinaabe have called for a moratorium on moose hunting. Mohawk people are fighting development on their territories. The Wet'suwet'en are fighting to protect their headwaters. The Sakopiak are fighting to preserve their unceded lands and waterways. And the Gitsin are fighting a corporate lawsuit for occupying unceded land. And just in the recent 2 weeks, we heard calls for justice all across Canada for Joyce Equan. I'm probably saying Echaquan. And those ring out through the country. And what do we hear? We hear silence from the government. So one of the things that was really important doing this work that I heard CommunityWise saying, and from the board here, is that they've had a lot of training. And I think a lot of organizations have a lot of training, but there was a real desperation, I'll use that word because it was, by CommunityWise staff to move beyond awareness, to go to more distinctions-based learnings around gender, identity, knowing how to interact with elders versus younger people, interacting with properly with Blackfoots, and making sure when they're interacting with Stony, they're following the proper protocols there. So they know there's differences. One of the things that didn't get emphasized enough in the report was the reason why I think they want this is because they have all these teachings. They're aware of some of the systemic colonialism, and I say aware of and about, but not intimately aware about, because most of them personally don't know an Indigenous person. And so that's where we really need to move towards if we're going to work towards against colonialism, which is the root cause of of why we can't even interact with each other well, even as Indigenous people, never mind interacting with mainstream Canadians and expecting them to properly have relationships with us. And so that resonated for me, but I couldn't really, if there was one point that I would have just wanted to focus the whole report on, would have been that point. How do we help CommunityWise and other organizations to start to develop relational accountability with each other based on Indigenous protocols? So, and that's key, because we, you know, and this is not just for non-Indigenous communities, organizations, but you see Indigenous programs, big mainstream Indigenous programs where Indigenous people are working there, and they're not connected to their communities either. So when I'm talking about Indigenous communities under attack, we have to remember it's not all about, you have to ask yourself, why do you want to work for Indigenous people or on Indigenous issues? And I say this blatantly, is it because you want to save us? Do you want to be like us? Because really it should be about being one of us. And understanding that battle that we're in every day, and that it's, you know, and joining us as one of our warriors to help protect our way of life. Because when our Indian residential school survivors go on to the next journey, we have to be able to make sure that we carry on as a nation and not become comfortable and not become forgiving yet, because we have to remember we can't be forgiving yet if we haven't reconciled the things that we're under attack for. And so that's what we need to organizations to know, is that they have to understand, and they won't understand that if they don't get to know us personally. And neither will other Indigenous people who are becoming comfortable working in those systems. And I know this specifically because I worked in a big agency. It was Alberta Health Services. And there are a lot of Indigenous people working there, but I don't see them at our gatherings. I don't, you know, and it worries me when you have big corporations or organizations making decisions for urban populations and First Nations on a provincial basis, and you've never stepped foot into an Indigenous home or on the reserve. So that's really what CommunityWise wants to know, how to do that. And how to move beyond that, and how do I really get to know an Indigenous person and become one of them and understand their way of thinking. And so and what it is that challenges them, what motivates us, because that's the other thing that resonated in the report. CommunityWise also wants to learn about the strengths and the stories of resistance and survivorship, not just about the historic colonialism, but, you know, in some of our discussions and in some of the survey results, you know, I got to have an intimate look, so I didn't get that, the report wouldn't let me report, but I mean, they didn't know that we have people that are in the Olympics playing on national hockey teams, heart surgeons, forensic scientists. So, you know, that they still are assuming that what they're learning based on legacy of colonialism is that we're still there. But while we're in this battle, we have real significant leaders who have broke down barriers, and they don't know about that. So that's what resonated for me, and that's what I say to anybody who's of all of our people and all our relations. I didn't self-identify with a pronoun, but that's my pronoun, is all relations, is that you have to, in your work, make sure that you teach our Indigenous people not just about our stories of hardship and war, but just how good we are at surviving every battle that we've been through, and how incredible our people are right now. So I come from a really strength-based. I'm so, you know, when I talk about youth, I don't stick to the deficits, because I say, you know what, these are first generation survivors of a system that was meant to bring them down. But here we are, they're working in mainstream, they're busting down barriers that residential schools cracked a little bit for us, but these guys are trampling the fences. And so that's what I saw. CommunityWise wants to know that. And I think there's a lot of organizations that are doing a lot of anti-racism work that want to move past that, but it's how do we do that? How do we connect with the right Indigenous people to help us really lead these solutions towards anti-racism and follow their leads? So that, I think, is a barrier that CommunityWise wants to address in becoming truly anti-racist in their work with Indigenous people. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Well, it's very well said. I'm honored the way it was said by Nicole. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Jackie. Steve, what was it like working on this project for you?
For me, I personally really enjoyed it. I thought it was really humbling, but I really liked the thought and the structure that went into the group. I liked the representation from across Treaty 7, as well as urban Indigenous peoples. I really liked the structure of having elder engagement, being able to begin our sessions, you know, in a way that we do as Indigenous peoples, being able to gather, being able to begin with a prayer, our introductions, having food. I really, really did appreciate that. But what I particularly really liked about this Indigenous Advisory Group was just the way that it was comprised of just several Indigenous community members. And of course, you know, we did have non-Indigenous people in the room who are also part of it as well. But, you know, we got to really shape our experiences, and it was often over laughter from past experiences of either general assumptions or stereotypes that we're always trying to break down. I think of us being able to do, you know, coming up with our charter, doing our notes, and just stories from what we've experienced as Indigenous peoples, you know, from all these different organizations and within society. And also just being able to share our stories as well, to be able to give a better understanding. I really liked the framework of it. I really liked the structure, but also just that it was also Indigenous led as well. You know, I do work in a post-secondary at Mount Royal University, and we definitely have a lot of allyship, but we don't have a strong representation of Indigenous professors or Indigenous colleagues. So a lot of the Indigenous framework or steering committees or planning committees that I've been a part of, I have often been one of the voice of Indigenous peoples, but we are totally underrepresented in a lot of other areas as well. So I really did appreciate this, but also just the impact and the mission that we had. I really liked CommunityWise was willing to recognize that this isn't going to just be a checklist. Oftentimes when we look at the word reconciliation, it's being thrown around because it's a word that is a celebrated one. It talks about a better future. It talks about coming together. But unfortunately, we have organizations and individuals who are treating decolonization and indigenization as a checklist for reconciliation. They're not understanding that we need to decolonize before we could move forward to indigenization and also work towards reconciliation. You know, indigenizing an organization like CommunityWise isn't just stamping a land acknowledgement on it or saying that they've done their bit for Indigenous people. It's truly switching the framework, but also the culture of the entire organization as a whole. That is where the decolonizing needs to come in. And the decolonizing is not going to be up just to Indigenous peoples. This has to include all Canadians equally. You know, we became a colonial nation with both of us here. We're trying to decolonize. We need to be able to decolonize, deconstruct, and also we need to weave together our fabrics of our Indigenous values, our Indigenous cultures, and our practices into these large frameworks like CommunityWise, but also across Canadian society. You know, I really liked that it was open to the idea of having stages, ways that we could look at offering training, also creating kind of a structure, a manual, and a guide that could be shared with other organizations, because CommunityWise was actually willing to sit down. You know, I know right from the beginning that they shared it was limited resources, nonprofit, but they were willing to sit down and commit to a framework and commit to an entire study and initiative when there is a lot of other major corporations and companies that aren't even doing that same thing. Exactly like Nicole said, they're trying to come in with a savior effect. What could we do to help? The feeling bad, it often comes with throwing money at it. But I really liked that CommunityWise wanted to do their part as a community organization to want to engage more Indigenous peoples. A lot of our events and rallies, we all come from the grassroots perspective because we're often having to fight against colonial systems that minimize us, that attack our treaty rights, that are constantly trying to take away everything, you know, as if the land was not enough. They want to come after our women, they want to come after our children, and that continues on to this current day. And with CommunityWise, it's about wanting to be able to do their part, but also recognizing their role as a space, as an organization within the downtown Calgary Beltline that wants to have its doors open for Indigenous peoples, but to also be able to engage more Indigenous groups. I really like the commitment that they were looking at doing this as a long term. I really like that it was recognized that it was not just going to be a checklist, because I've had that many, many times. Even when we look at since the TRC report was released in 2014, it seemed like indigenization and reconciliation was all over the place at that time. And as we look at areas such as COVID, I'm not even hearing land acknowledgements anymore. A lot of that funding that was committed to around the TRC has ran out. I've seen Indigenous positions either eliminated from companies at the first go, and that's still continuing on today as we're dealing with the economic crisis within COVID. You know, so I really like that CommunityWise reached out to the Indigenous community. We have been led by an Indigenous scientific researcher, but also engage the local Indigenous community and the local urban Indigenous community members as well in their framework, because, you know, if we're going to be able to offer implementations and recommendations, they have to be from the voices of the people whose stories are often go untold or unheard. And unfortunately, within Canadian society, that's often Indigenous peoples. I often share with people that it seemed like my story never mattered until I got a post-secondary education. Those true stories of Indigenous realities, you know, what it was like going into residential school, what it was like being a First Nation woman like my grandmother coming into the city in the 1960s, trying to find a job, trying to find housing and things like that. You know, I struggle with those realities today, but those are the true realities of it, seeing the culture stripped away, taken away from a young age. And it's funny because I often sit on a lot of project initiatives where people want to gather a reality or Indigenous perspective. There's so much times I phone my relatives, but it's because it comes through my voice because of my title of working in a colonial education system and within a colonial education institution that story matters. But a lot of the true realities, those experiences, I'm reaching out for my family for them when we're having cultural presentations, the stories being told. And it is very, very important that they need to be captured before they're forgotten. You know, sometimes it is definitely a big struggle with being just a generation or two away from being in residential school, but I know that these stories are valuable because they give me a better understanding of my family and my reality, and I'll be able to share them even after my relatives are no longer physically here and have gone into the spirit world. So I do appreciate the framework of this research initiative, and I really like the grounds that it was established on, but also the approach through CommunityWise as well, and also with Nicole as well. It was a very big honor to be a part of it. Thank you.
Well, it's beautiful. Thank you, Steve. Jenna, what was it like being part of this project, and what are your highlights?
It was an amazing experience, honestly. Like, being a part of an Indigenous-led initiative was something that I don't get to experience very often. I feel like a lot of people don't, because so many times initiatives like this are, like it's been said before, like part of like a reconciliation checklist, or like an effort to be like, oh, we've done our due diligence in terms of Indigenous representation and like our efforts to like decolonize. But they'll have like one or two like token Indigenous people on a panel of like 10 and lean heavily on those people, and then say that they did their job. So to have an initiative that was like led by Indigenous people, that was like, that took place in a room just full of people from different nations, from different backgrounds, but all representing different like aspects of and different experiences of being an Indigenous person within Canada, was amazing. I also really loved the opportunity of working with everyone, because Michelle is so intimidating, or you're intimidating. So doing this podcast was intimidating. Working with Nicole was so intimidating, because she's just so brilliant, and she came into this project knowing exactly what she like needed to be done, and she had like such a like powerful game plan and like all ready to go. And I was just like, wow, this is what Indigenous academia is. It's like strong Indigenous women who like really know their stuff and are like ready to like just come in and like indigenize the academy and decolonize an institution. And it was just so cool to see. And like Megan was so cool to work with, because she's so knowledgeable about like all of the initiatives happening around Mohkinstsis and like all of the work that's currently being done within like the nonprofit sector. And it was just like, that was really intimidating. Jackie is such an incredible source of knowledge and also like empathy, and was just so wonderful to hear her speak every time she had anything to say. It always also brought me like such a sense of calm and such a sense of peace whenever she would pray for us. And Steve, you're so knowledgeable, and you managed to condense so much information into like all of your sentences and like convey so much of what everyone is thinking and feeling and all of these experiences that like so many of us have had, and you managed to sum them up so eloquently, and it's just incredible. And Jackie, or sorry, JC, I keep forgetting that it's an initial, not a name. When I see it written out, you're like talking to you and hearing about your incredible life experiences, and you're so connected to culture, and your life has been like so incredibly like fascinating in terms of you came to Calgary and you did your degree and you're so aspirational. That's like exactly what I want to do, and I'm still striving for it. And I really want to live up to that. And yeah, it's just been so wonderful. And our wonderful rep from Diamond Willow, I love the work that you're doing so much. Diamond Willow Youth Lodge is probably one of my favorite organizations within Calgary right now. I have some donations coming from you guys from an elder and down in the US, by the way. Those should be here by tomorrow. Some pouches that he made for the kids. But Diamond Willow being a part of this was like such an important step too, because like Indigenous youth are, they're so underrepresented in panels like this, because these groups are always made up of Indigenous, like of elders and like people who are like middle-aged or like at least in their 20s. And so like Indigenous youth are so underrepresented, they never get to have a voice on these panels. So the fact that Diamond Willow became a part of this was great. My major takeaway from this was that you can train organizations and you can do individual like small group staff trainings until everyone's blue in the face. People can be like, yes, we know all the issues that Indigenous people are facing. Yes, we know colonization was bad. And then eventually, if all you're doing is trainings and all you're doing is awareness work, people start to burn out on it, and they start to tune it out. And they start to be like, yeah, we get it, and they roll their eyes. Unless you give them something specific to focus their efforts on, like unless you give them like actionable items of not just being like aware of like intergenerational trauma, not just being aware of like institutional failings, but giving them things like action items to work on, such as calls to action, and like pointing them in very real and measurable directions, and giving them very specific mandates that they just feel like they've done their due diligence. So to have a project like this going on, where we're not just trying to be like, well, how can we do more effective staff trainings, but also saying, how can we take an institution or an organization and remake it from the ground up so that their basic policies contain right within them like concrete examples of how to indigenize their entire institution or how to indigenize their entire organization. That's something that I thought was really cool. And that was the most awesome thing that I thought came out of Nicole's report, was just seeing that there was no pussyfooting around it. No being like polite and gentle about saying like, no, there needs to be like equity in hiring. There needs to be like concerted efforts to like realize when like organizations have a problematic history and problematic policies in place. It was just, yeah, that was the best part of it for me, was just not having to be apologetic about our outcomes and our takeaways.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenna, for sharing that. And I hope you're not finding this intimidating. So
Oh, always.
it was pretty cool hearing that. Megan, do you want to head up next?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that I really appreciated about having this group convened is that as a white passing Indigenous person who is whose family history is from Treaty 3 area, it's really important that I recognize that the experiences that I have are not universal Indigenous experiences, not that the concept of universal Indigenous experiences exists, but that there are unique contexts for people whose history with this specific land, like CommunityWise occupies a building that takes up space on land, and that those relationships with the land are not relationships that I have an intimate connection with because my family is not from here. This is not our land. And so I think it was really important to have that representation from people whose lived experiences are different than my own, and also whose histories with them, connections with the land is really specific to this time and place, because I don't think we can afford to ignore the fact that this building that I'm in and the organization that we're in exists because of colonialism. If colonialism had not happened here, I wouldn't, this literally the roof over my head right now wouldn't exist. And so it was really important to hear from people who have had their home on this land for millennia, and also including people who, you know, Calgary being a large urban center as well, those experiences. And so that was really refreshing. I've been in situations where I'm sort of seen as like the Indigenous voice, and that's really uncomfortable because I think, you know, I don't want to be kind of like the palatable, you know, sort of white passing Indigenous person that is being seen to speak for everyone. Like that's not a realistic representation of what it means to exist in Indigenous community and being accountable to Indigenous community. So that's something that I've appreciated very much. And I also think that for me, one of the big things that I'm most excited about with this report that Nicole created is the opportunity to have it be something that doesn't just sit on the shelf now, and something we're already kind of halfway through the first recommendation, which was incorporating the land acknowledgements within an organization. And so we're doing trainings with Tim Fox from the Calgary Foundation. And even just in the way that we're doing that, it's actually like we've cleared the agenda on board meetings to make space for that. So rather than having it be an addition or thing that we do in our spare time, if people can make it, we're actually just making it part of the board agenda. Like that is the meeting. And so it's really nice to start to see incorporating Indigenous-led solutions as the way of looking at an organization as a whole, rather than just having them be little pieces that you can kind of tack on and hope that it becomes sort of like Indigenous-ish, but actually like incorporating those values into organizational culture, and shifting the way that CommunityWise views its organizational culture is something that I think we're just starting to scratch the surface on that. I think that changing culture whether you're looking at communities or organizations. It's a long process, but I'm really excited that it seems like we're starting to maybe get a little bit deeper than just scratching the surface. So I think, as Jackie had said, it takes a long time for these things to happen, but it has to start somewhere. So those are kind of the big takeaways that I've had from this so far.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Megan. JC, I think we'll go up next with you. What are your thoughts about this working on this committee, and what were some of your highlights about working on this project?
Well, I think of I think it was one of the first times that we met at CommunityWise. Returning to CommunityWise for myself personally was exciting and welcoming. I really appreciate, the work that CommunityWise has done in the past with developing their AROC and equity framework. And I'm happy to see that one of the recommendations from the board is to build upon that. But yeah, coming into the space again, there is a good energy there. And I noticed that right away walking in. But I just wanted to mention, earlier on when we were first meeting, we were all sitting there together, all reviewing sort of those competency or cultural competency surveys within different sectors, such as like health, education, and we were reviewing them. And what Steve said resonated with this terminology that gets sort of passed around and stuff, say allyship, cultural safety, decolonization, indigenization. I felt like we really saw sort of like a timeline based on when these documents were made, to what year, in relation to our processes as people here in the Canadian state, like the whole timeline of when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action came out in 2015, and there's efforts there, but there's also those sort of the interchangeable terminology that's thrown around, and I think looking at that really tells a story of how far we still have to go in terms of decolonization, like really breaking down those perceptions or the conceptions of Indigenous people, the conceptions non-Indigenous people have of themselves. I think that was one of the bigger highlights for me, was sitting down together as a group, and or maybe it was the food, because I think I was sitting beside the food that day too. But yeah, it was interesting to see, because there are a lot of organizations out there taking the first steps and everything towards what it is to be an ally, what it is to be accountable to Indigenous communities, and it's great. It's great that the efforts are starting up. Everyone's at their own different level, but I think ultimately it does boil down to where you're at individually, in terms of the understanding who you are, or situating yourself in time or in history, and as a person. Like for me, I go back to coming to Calgary, coming to Mohkinstsis in this jalopy U-Haul with my daughters and everything I owned, and feeling so unsure, but knowing that I needed to learn about where I was going to start my education. And I think that a lot of people, a lot of non-Indigenous people are starting to do that, and it's promising and everything. But Nicole, you mentioned like a lot of the realities that are being faced by Indigenous communities across Turtle Island. It's like now it's happening still. And I think there's a big sort of changing shift in how we are in relation to one another, and it's a time of uncertainty, but it's also a time to be empowered to make those changes. I think that one of the board and staff recommendations on how to build accountability, one of them that stood out to me, I'm looking at the report right now, is enhancing relationship building with Indigenous people and communities. And I think I want to say, that can be a long journey, but I think it is everyone's responsibility to look at like the world views of all the diverse Indigenous people here, like especially the Blackfoot, and their protocols, and learning the protocols and how you approach an elder and all these things. You have to learn how to do on your own, and you're not going to do it on your own. You have to come together and have these conversations that can be difficult and uncomfortable, but that's the way that real change will happen, in order for being accountable to the communities, but also as yourself, to putting yourself out there is it's challenging. It's also humbling too. And I think about how CommunityWise began this project, and I really think it's important to reflect on Jackie being part of it, diverse Indigenous representation on this Indigenous Advisory Group. Being deeply involved is really important from start to finish. So I think that can be sort of highlighted, as well as the process that Nicole and Bellacy took. So that's all I'll say. Thanks.
Well, that's a lot. So thank you, JC. I appreciate everybody's words and everybody's shares, and I can't thank you enough. And I want to go down to Maris and see what your thoughts of the whole project were. What are some of your highlights, and go from there.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It was a wonderful project to be a part of. As everyone mentioned before, just being part of a project that was led by an Indigenous elder and Indigenous academics and Indigenous grassroots warriors, that was such a powerful space to be in, that felt genuinely fully led by and for Indigenous peoples. So that was incredible. And I'm not an academic by any means. I'm a frontline grassroots nonprofit youth worker. So I really look at the project and the outputs, what does all this fancy stuff actually do? What do these workshops create? And what I saw was that through this project and this anti-racism initiative, CommunityWise was formed into a space where Indigenous youth could come and be physically, culturally, mentally, and spiritually safe. It was a space where Indigenous youth could gather and not have to apologize or to explain what their ways of being are, why we're smudging, why we're doing a pipe ceremony. And no, it's not going to set off the sprinklers. Thank you very much. You don't have to worry about that. And we were really given a space where we could truly be ourselves and practice our cultural ways without worrying about what people are going to think. Are they going to understand? Are they going to try to stop us from doing this ceremony? And when you think about the fact that only a couple generations back, it was illegal in the Indian Act for Indigenous groups to even gather, let alone have ceremony. That's incredible that we're able to do this today. And I'm really, really proud of all the work that CommunityWise did. It was wonderful. And thank you so much, Michelle, for giving us this platform to share our experiences. It means a lot to have our voices heard. So thank you. Hi, all my relations.
What an honor it is to host this conversation. I'm really like hearing the project through everybody's eyes, I think is so needed, and to hear the background of everybody is so needed in order to understand where this came from. So I hope you know that I am the one who's most honored to be here right now, and I'm grateful. So with that, we have to close up, unfortunately. I don't want to, that's for certain, but we'll start with Jackie and just say, thank you, and any closing thoughts that you might want to include.
To close with a prayer, okay? And before I say my prayer, I want to thank everybody for all the words of wisdom that you said, and all everything that was spoken. Very well done. And I'm going to start my prayer.
Masi Cho, thank you in Sachu Dene for that prayer. I can't thank you enough. I did pause the recording as we respect protocols to not record our prayers. So thank you again, Jackie, for starting us in a good way, ending us in a good way. Thank you. Nicole, do you have any finishing thoughts that you want to add?
Did you say me? Okay, sorry. I was just thinking about, I can feel my hips growing, but I think it's almost a good thing with COVID because you don't have to touch doors. Like, I got really strong hips, hitting doors. But anyways, I think in closing, I just really want to encourage everyone to keep doing the work that they're doing through anti-racism work. And I always feel myself right now at this time in my life, I'm sort of in a in between. So, I'm not a youth anymore, but I'm not older person yet, I hope. So I'm confused between, as the six codes say, I'm not ready to put down my arms yet, my weapons, and so and to pick up a pipe and so I just I think that what's important is, as Indigenous women and Two-Spirit LGBTQI people, keep speaking up. Like I said, don't get comfortable, because when we do speak up, we're often called rebellious or feminists. But I want to remind everybody that traditionally, and I believe this today, Indigenous women and Two-Spirit LGBTQI people, we're the law. And we rightfully need to take our space back, because this work for decolonization won't happen until the space is decolonized and Indigenous women and Two-Spirit LGBTQI people are given back their place and their voice. And it's up to us to make sure that we do that. And so I just want to encourage and thank everybody that's on the call and listening. Don't get tired, don't get comfortable.
That's awesome. Now, Steve, normally I'd have you go, but Jenna, I think we talked about you needing to leave. So maybe I'll just give you some space to any closing thoughts that you want to go, and then we'll go back to Steve.
I think that might have been somebody else. I'm here till 3.
I swear every time I unmute myself, I remute myself. Steve, would you like to, do you have any closing thoughts that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think this is a great way that we get to really capture all of our work, kind of like a living artifact that gets to get passed on, and just like we created a package to assist further organizations, I hope that this gets included as well. And it truly was a privilege, Nicole, Jackie, Megan, JC, and Jenna, and everyone else who we connected with to do this project. Ishnish, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Okay, Jenna, now it's your turn. Oh, wait, just a second here. Let's try this one more time.
There we go. It was just so great to work with everybody, and like I feel like I wish I could have spent more time getting to know everyone and learning more about all the work that everyone's doing, because it was all like so cool and again like very aspirational. It's like everybody's either doing or has already done the things that I hope to do in the future. So that was such a great opportunity, and thanks to everybody for really putting everything that they had into this project. Everyone was so invested, and nobody really phoned it in or or backburnered it, no matter what else was going on in their lives, and that was so wonderful. So thank you so much.
Masi. Megan, do you have any closing thoughts to end this with today?
Yeah, I just want to thank you all for being a part of this and for creating space to have these conversations, especially Jackie for always opening for prayer with us and helping us close and going on in our days in a good way. Really honored to have you with us and to be doing that. And for all of you to even a global pandemic didn't stop us, and adjusting to meeting on Zoom instead of in person, and appreciate that so much. And I'm really looking forward to seeing and hearing all of the ways to maintain these relationships and to hear all of the great things that you all are continuing on to do. So thank you all very much.
Thanks again, Megan. JC, I think Maris was the one who had to leave us a little early, so you get the final thought, and I just wanted to say thank you for everything you shared.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciated all the sharing and the powerful impacts, that have gone into this project. The leadership and the guidance of Jackie and Nicole, two very, very strong Indigenous women that I highly respect. Thank you so much. I want to say, if this is something that is going to be a part of, further excelling anti-racism or anti-bias education towards Indigenous people, I want to say, look into what your role is. I think everybody has gifts that they have. I myself, I'm continuing to explore that journey, but I think we all have a role to play in how we occupy the space that we live, work, and play in. And we also, have that responsibility to look at the collective experiences as well. Thank you, all my relations.
That's wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Well, what an honor it's been to be doing this podcast today. I want to say thank you to CommunityWise and the Human Rights Education and Multicultural Fund for funding this great initiative in this podcast today. I want to say thank you to my ancestors, my granny, my mom, of what strength looks like through your example. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt, my stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian roots and family, and teaching me to be a proud Calgarian. Through her, I'm a second generation proud Calgarian. I want to say thank you to my husband, Darcy, for producing and editing this show, on top of being my husband, my childhood friend, the father of our child, the support of my journey down the red road. He's witnessed decades of racism and sexism. To our child, who I am blessed to learn from every single day, I am honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. And I hope my daughter and my family and our community will be proud of this podcast, especially as we go down our red road. And lastly, for me, I always end with a little bit of laughter, because it matters to me. If you remember from the start, I introduced myself as a person from the hare family. So I always end my podcast with a side eye to those Calgary rabbits and say, "You're lucky I'm not Tradish." And my beautiful cousin would respond, "Or you'd be in my dish." Thanks again for having us and watching today.